The Southern Ocean is not merely a body of water. It is a planetary engine of violence. It is the only place on Earth where the wind can travel around the globe without hitting a single scrap of land, building momentum, day after day, until it screams like a banshee and tears the tops off waves that are the size of cathedral spires. Here, at 60 degrees south latitude, the ocean is a churning, grayscale nightmare that sailors call the screaming 60s. It is a place where entropy wins, where biology usually huddles near the surface or buries itself deep in the mud, hiding from the sheer kinetic energy of the water. But on a moonless Tuesday in late August, the research vessel Polaris was holding station right in the teeth of a gale, 300 miles north of the Antarctic ice shelf. The steel hull of the 200-foot ship shuddered and groaned under the repetitive impact of 40-foot swells, the metal crying out as it flexed against the crushing weight of the Atlantic meeting the Pacific. Rain, mixed with freezing sleet, lashed the bridge glass like buckshot, dissolving the world outside into a blur of chaotic motion. Inside the acoustic lab, buried deep in the ship's belly to minimize engine vibration and shield the sensitive, equipment from the roar of the storm, Dr. Silas Vance held onto his desk with white-knuckled desperation as the floor tilted 20 degrees to port. Silas wasn't afraid of the storm. He had spent 20 years chasing sounds in the worst weather the planet could throw at him, from the typhoons of the Philippine Sea to the bone-crushing ice storms of the Bering Strait. He knew the structural limits of steel and the buoyancy equations of naval architecture. He trusted the ship. What he was afraid of, what made the hair on his arms stand up and his heart hammer against his ribs, was what he was hearing through his high-fidelity headphones. It was a sound that shouldn't exist. It was coming from a depth of 7,000 feet, from the crushing blackness of the abyssal plain, where the pressure would turn a human being into red paste in a microsecond. It wasn't the groan of shifting tectonic plates grinding against each other. It wasn't the mechanical whine of a covert submarine testing its limits. It was a vocalization, a scream, high-pitched, complex, and terrified, and then silence. A silence so absolute, so heavy, it felt weightier than the water itself. Silas stared at the spectrogram on his monitor, the jagged red line of the sound wave frozen in pixels against the blue background. He ran the cursor over the peak frequency. It matched the biological footprint of an Orcinus orca, a killer whale. But killer whales are surface hunters. They breathe air. They live in the sunlit zone, rarely diving past a few hundred meters. They do not dive to the bottom of the world. They do not hunt in the dark zone, where the temperature hovers near freezing and the pressure is 2 tons per square inch. Unless we have been wrong about them for all of human history. Unless there is another tribe down there, waiting in the crushing dark. If you are fascinated by the terrifying mysteries of the deep ocean and the creatures that defy our understanding of biology, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We are diving into the abyss today, into a story that has been suppressed for years, and you won't want to miss what we find. The Polaris righted itself with a shuddering lurch, sending a stack of heavy logbooks sliding across the linoleum floor of the lab. Silas didn't move to pick them up. He hit the playback button on his console. The sound filled the small, dimly lit room, a piercing shriek that rose in frequency, modulated rapidly, before abruptly cutting off. It sounded like metal tearing, but organic. It sounded like something massive dying in agony. Silas ran the audio through a filter, stripping away the low-frequency noise of the ship's thrusters. The clarity was chilling. It was a dialect he had never heard before, sharper, faster, more aggressive than the resident or transient pods of the Pacific Northwest. It was a language forged in high pressure. "Dr. Vance," the intercom crackled, the voice of Captain Holloway sounding tinny, exhausted, and frayed at the edges. "We are marking heavy turbulence and rising swell. The barometer is dropping like a stone. Secure your gear. We're coming about to ride out the storm. We can't hold this station any longer. Silas grabbed the mic, his hand shaking slightly. "Belay that, Captain. Hold your position. We are not moving." "Excuse me?" Holloway's voice dropped an octave, the patience of a man who had been awake for 30 hours, playing hide-and-seek with icebergs evaporating. "We are in a force 9 gale, Doctor. I am not holding position broadside to these waves for your listening pleasure. We are taking green water over the bow. If I don't turn into the wind, we risk rolling." "I have a contact," Silas said, staring at the screen, watching the waterfall display of the sonar update. "Biological. Massive. Depth 2,000 meters and descending. Captain, I think we found the ghost pod." There was a long, heavy pause on the line. The ghost pod was a myth in the oceanographic community, a campfire story told by sonar operators and drunk fishermen in the bars of Ushuaia and Hobart. The theory was that a subspecies of orca had evolved to hunt exclusively in the deep scattering layer, the zone where bioluminescent squid and deep-sea fish migrate. They were rumored to be larger, darker, and capable of holding their breath for over 2 hours. No one had ever photographed one. No one had ever recorded one. Until 5 minutes ago. Silas was looking at the acoustic fingerprint of a ghost. "You have 5 minutes to verify," Holloway said, the tension palpable even over the comms. "Then I am turning the ship into the wind before we capsize. If you lose your gear, that's on your grant money. If I lose my ship, that's on my soul." Silas didn't need 5 minutes. He needed a camera. He needed eyes in the dark. He dialed the hangar bay, his fingers fumbling with the keys. Maya, are you there?" Maya Karras, the expedition's lead biologist and RAV pilot, answered immediately. She sounded awake, likely adrenaline-fueled by the storm battering the hull. "I'm here, Silas, trying to keep the Argus from swinging into the bulkhead. It's rough down here. The straps are straining. Pre-dive checks complete. Are you insane? We can't launch in this. The crane will snap. The A-frame is icing up. The wind shear alone will swing the robot into the screw. We have a signature, Maya. 15 kilohertz. Pulsed modulation. It's them. They are right below us. And they are killing something big." Silence from the hangar. Silas knew what she was thinking. He knew the calculation she was running. Launching a $2 million remotely operated vehicle in a storm was career suicide if it broke, and potentially fatal for the deck crew if the heavy robot swung loose and crushed someone against the rail. But Maya was like him. She was obsessed with the empty spaces on the map. She had spent her life studying the deep, waiting for a glimpse of something new. "I need deck clearance," Maya said, her voice turning to steel. "And I need you to talk me down. If the cable snaps, we lose the Argus forever and Silas. If we kill someone doing this, we go to prison." "We won't," Silas lied. "Just get it in the water." The next 20 minutes were a blur of chaotic precision. The rear deck of the Polaris was awash of freezing seawater and blinding halogen floodlights. The crew, dressed in heavy yellow foul-weather gear, moved like soldiers in a war zone, fighting for traction on the slick steel. They unlatched the massive RAV from its cradle, the machine looking like a robotic insect the size of a minivan, bristling with cameras, lights, and titanium manipulator arms. It hung from the A-frame crane, swinging perilously as the ship pitched into a trough, heavy and lethal. "Deploying!" The deck chief screamed over the wind, his voice barely audible even through the headset. The crane lowered. The Argus hit the water with a splash. It was instantly swallowed by a passing wave. The cable played out, the thick armored umbilical cord connecting the robot to the ship, carrying power down and data up. It was the only lifeline between the world of men and the world of monsters. Inside the control van, a shipping container welded to the deck and filled with monitors, Maya sat in the pilot's chair. Her hands gripped the joysticks with delicate intensity. Silas stood behind her, watching the wall of screens. The monitors flickered, showing only the chaotic bubbles of the surface turbulence, then the blue-green turbulence of the prop wash, and then, as the RAV sank past the hull, the sudden, shocking clarity of the deep. "Depth 100 meters, Maya called out, her eyes locked on the telemetry. "Systems green. Descent rate 30 meters per minute. Current is strong, pushing us east." "Push it," Silas said, leaning over her shoulder. "The signal is fading. They're going deeper. We have to catch them before they scatter." "I can't push it, Silas. The current shear is pushing the umbilical. If I go too fast, I'll tangle the cable in the props." "We have to be patient." The Argus descended. The light from the surface faded from turquoise to indigo, then to a bruised purple, and finally to absolute black. They were entering the midnight zone. Here, the only light came from the ROV's halogen beams, cutting a stark white cone through the darkness. Marine snow, organic detritus falling from the surface, drifted past the lens like a blizzard in reverse, a constant rain of dead biological matter feeding the abyss. Silas watched the sonar display. A green sweep line circled the screen. Ping, ping, nothing, just the empty void. The acoustic signature he had heard earlier was gone. "Depth 1,000 meters, Maya said, passing the scattering layer. Usually this depth is teeming with life lanternfish, jellies, squid, siphonophores. It is the busiest highway in the ocean, but the screen was empty. The water was barren. No blips, no movement. Where is everything?" Maya whispered. "It's a desert. There should be biomass here." "They scared it off," Silas said. "Whatever is down here, it cleared the room. It's an apex predator effect. Everything runs when the wolves come." "Depth 1,500 meters. "Silas, look at the bottom profiler." Silas looked. The sonar was picking up the seafloor, still 500 meters below. But floating above the bottom, suspended in the water column like a cloud, was a massive, amorphous shape. It wasn't moving with the current. It was static. "Is that a geological feature?" Maya asked. "A seamount?" "No," Silas said, squinting at the grainy image. "It's soft. It's absorbing the ping. It's biological. Approaching target. 2,000 meters. Slowing descent." Maya feathered the thrusters, bringing the Argus to a hover 50 meters above the object. She turned on the main high-intensity floodlights. The darkness retreated, and what it revealed made the blood drain from Silas's face. It was a carcass. A colossal squid, Mesonychoteuthis hamiltoni. It was immense, easily 40 feet long, its mantle the size of a bus. Its tentacles, thick as tree trunks and lined with swiveling hooks, drifted limply in the current, pale and ragged. But it wasn't just dead. It had been butchered. "Zoom in," Silas commanded, his voice tight. The camera zoomed. The squid's body was shredded. Massive chunks of flesh had been torn away with surgical precision. The beak, a razor-sharp instrument capable of shearing through steel cables, was shattered. Ink was still leaking from the corpse, a black ribbon curling into the dark. But the most terrifying detail was the bite mark on the mantle. It was a crescent shape, perfectly defined, clean and jagged. Maya overlaid the measurement grid on the screen. "That bite radius," she stammered. "It's 4 feet wide." "Silas, a great white shark has a bite radius of maybe 18 inches. A surface orca, maybe 24. What has a mouth that big?" "Something that grew in the dark," Silas whispered. "Something that got big because it had no competition. Keep scanning. They didn't finish the meal." "How do you know?" "Because the heart is still there. Orcas eat the softest parts first. The liver, the tongue, the heart. They left the best part. It's fresh. Maybe they were interrupted," Maya said, panning the camera around the grisly scene. "By what?" Silas asked. "What interrupts a pod of super predators at 2,000 meters? "By us," Maya said quietly. "The lights. The noise of the thrusters. As if on cue, the sonar pinged. A single sharp tone. Not from the ship, from the dark. "Contact," Maya yelled. "Fast mover. Bearing 270, coming up from the trench." On the sonar screen, a red dot appeared at the edge of the range. It was moving at 40 knots. That is impossible speed for this depth. The pressure at 2,000 meters is over 2,000 pounds per square inch. Water becomes viscous. To move that fast requires immense power, immense muscular density. "It's coming straight for the ROV," Maya said, her hands flying over the controls. "I'm taking evasive action. Thrusters full reverse." "No." Silas grabbed her shoulder, his grip bruising. "Don't run. If you run, you trigger the chase instinct. Hold your ground. Turn the lights to full. Let it see us." The red dot closed the distance in seconds. It was on them. The camera view swirled as the water around the ROV was displaced by a massive body passing just out of sight. The Argus spun, the turbulence rocking it violently, the warning alarm screaming in the van. "I lost visual," Maya shouted. "Where is it? Did it hit us?" "Behind us, 6 o'clock. It's circling. It's assessing." Maya spun the Ariav 180 degrees. The lights swept through the blackness, catching particles of marine snow. And there it was. It hung in the water 20 feet from the lens, motionless, suspended in the void like a monolith. It was an orca, but it was wrong. It was huge, easily 35 feet long, dwarfing its surface cousins. Its skin was not the sleek black and white of a panda. It was a mottled, bruised gray, covered in deep white scars that glowed in the halogen beam. The eye patch, usually a stark white oval, was missing entirely. Its face was a mask of solid shadow. But it was the eyes that stopped Silas's heart. They weren't the dark, brown, soulful eyes of a mammal. They were reflective. They glowed green in the light, possessing a tapetum lucidum like a deep-sea shark, adapted for hunting in zero light. It was a creature of the abyss. It opened its mouth. The teeth were not the conical, even teeth of a killer whale. They were jagged, interlocking, and translucent. They looked like serrated glass. "It's looking at us," Maya whispered. "It's analyzing the machine. It's not attacking." The creature didn't attack. It drifted closer, its pectoral fins long and tapered like wings, staring it with eerie grace. It approached the manipulator arm of the ROV. It nudged the titanium claw with its snout. Then it rolled onto its side. It looked directly into the camera lens. It wasn't looking at the robot. It was looking through the robot. It was looking at them. The speakers in the control van erupted. It wasn't a scream this time. It was a series of clicks. Rapid-fire machine gun clicks. Click, 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 click. "It's echolocating us," Silas said. "It's taking an X-ray. It knows the RAV is hollow. It knows it's not food. It knows it's a tool." "Silas," Maya said, her voice trembling, "look at the sonar. Look behind it." Silas tore his eyes away from the monster on the screen and looked at the radar display. 3 more red dots had appeared, then 5, then 10. They were rising from the trench wall, surrounding the RAV in a sphere. They aren't hunting the squid, Silas realized, a cold dread settling in his stomach. The squid was bait. They left it there. "Bait for what?" Maya asked. "For whatever came to investigate," Silas said. "For us." They heard the ship. They heard the ping. And they set a trap. The lead whale, the gray giant, slapped its tail against the water, a thunderous concussion that shook the camera feed. It was a signal, a command. The other dots accelerated. "Pull it." Silas screamed. "Maya, blow the ballast. Get us out of here. Now." Maya hit the emergency ascent button. The Argus dropped its lead weights and shot upward. But as the camera looked down, capturing the receding darkness, Silas saw the pod converging. They weren't swimming randomly. They were forming a lattice, a net of bodies. They were coordinating, and then the feed cut out. Static filled the monitors. "We lost video," Maya yelled. "Data link is severed." "Did the cable snap?" "No," Maya said, pointing to the tension gauge. "The cable is fine, but the signal is gone. They bit through the fiber optic line." "That's impossible," Silas said. "That cable is armored steel. It's designed to withstand shark bites." "They knew," Maya said, staring at the gray static. "They scanned the robot. They found the weak point. And they cut the eyes out." The ship lurched again, the storm above reminding them that they were trapped between two hells. But down in the dark, something was following the cable up. Something that had tasted metal and found it wanting. Something that was now curious about the taste of the thing on the other end of the line. The ghost pod was no longer a myth. It was a hunting party. And the Polaris had just rung the dinner bell. The severed data link was a blindness more terrifying than the absolute darkness waiting outside the hull. In the cramped, humidity-slicked control van of the Polaris, the wall of high-definition screens displayed nothing but blue noise, the digital equivalent of a flatline. Maya Karras sat frozen, her hands hovering over the useless joysticks, her face illuminated by the flickering static of a dead connection. The tension gauge for the winch cable was the only thing still alive in the room, the needle twitching erratically in the red zone, dancing between maximum load and structural failure. The cable was still attached, but it was heavy. Impossibly heavy. It wasn't just the dead weight of the water column or the titanium cage of the ROV dragging against the deep currents. It was the weight of resistance. "Winch speed full," Silas barked into the headset, his voice tight and devoid of the academic detachment he usually wore like armor. "Get it up. Now, don't worry about the dampeners. The drum is straining." The deck chief shouted back over the intercom system, the sound of the wind howling behind him like a physical entity battering the door. "We are pulling against massive drag, Doctor. The hydraulic pressure is redlining. It feels like we hooked a submarine. If the cable snaps under this tension, it will whip back and cut the A-frame in half like a wire through cheese. Just pull it," Silas yelled, slamming his hand on the console, startling Maya into motion. "Override the safety limiters. Burn the motor if you have to, but get that machine out of the water." The ship groaned, a deep, metallic complaint that vibrated through the deck plates as the massive hydraulic winch fought the ocean. The Argus was dead weight, dangling 2,000 meters down, being dragged up through the water column against a current that wanted to keep it. But was it just dead weight? Or was it being ridden? Silas turned his back on the static screens and watched the depth counter unwind on the winch display. 1,800 meters. 1,750. 1,500. It was painfully, agonizingly slow. Every meter felt like a negotiation with gravity. The numbers ticked down with the lethargy of a countdown to an explosion. "We have acoustic contact again," Silas said, switching his focus to the sonar array on the ship's hull. The main hydrophone, separate from the rove system and mounted directly to the keel, was picking up activity directly beneath the ship. The sound was chaotic. It wasn't the organized, rhythmic hunting calls of surface orcas or the mournful, melodic songs of humpbacks. It was a cacophony of clicks and buzzes, overlapping and frenzied. It sounded like a hive of angry hornets amplified to deafening levels, a sonic weapon designed to disorient and terrify. "They're swarming it," Silas whispered, tracing the chaotic lines on the waterfall display with a trembling finger. "They aren't just letting it go. They're following the robot up. They're attacking it as it ascends." "How fast?" Maya asked, finally tearing her eyes away from the blue static to look at the sonar feed. "Ascent rate matches the winch. They're pacing us. They're escorting the intruder to the door." At 500 meters, the behavior changed abruptly. The chaotic buzzing stopped, as if a switch had been flipped by a master controller. The silence that followed was brief, less than a second of dead air, before it was replaced by a single unified pulse. Thump, low frequency. Thump, high amplitude. It was a drumbeat. It was the sound of a heart, the size of a car, beating in the dark. "That's a coordination signal," Silas said, his blood running cold. "They aren't just chasing anymore. They're planning something. They're getting ready to breach. Depth 100 meters. The deck chief called, his voice cracking with strain over the coms. "I see the lights. The emergency strobes on the Argus are still firing. But, oh God." "What?" Silas demanded, grabbing the door handle and throwing the steel hatch open to the storm. "What do you see?" "Just get out here. Get the lights on the water. Everyone on the rail." Silas and Maya burst out of the control van onto the rain-slicked deck. The storm was still raging, waves crashing over the gunnels and soaking them instantly with freezing spray. The deck crew, huddled in their yellow foul-weather gear to protect against the biting wind, had the massive halogen floodlights trained on the churning water directly behind the stern. The ocean was a mess of whitecaps and black troughs, a violent landscape of motion. And then, breaking the surface like a corpse returning from a watery grave, the Argus appeared. It was unrecognizable. The sleek, distinct yellow titanium frame was bent inward, crumpled like a soda can in a vise. The high-density buoyancy foam, designed to withstand the crushing pressure of the deep, was gouged with deep, raking scars that exposed the raw material underneath. The camera housing hung by a single wire, swaying pitifully in the gale. It spun slowly in the swell, battered and broken, a testament to a force that biology shouldn't possess. "Get it on deck," Silas screamed over the gale, before they hit it again. The crane groaned, hydraulic lines hissing, as it lifted the broken robot out of the water. As it swung over the rail, gallons of seawater cascading from its ruined chassis onto the deck, Silas saw them. Just below the surface, in the illuminated pool of light cast by the ship, shapes were moving. They were huge, pale, and incredibly fast. They broke the surface not to breathe, but to watch. A massive head rose out of the water, vertical and imposing. It was a gray giant. The scar tissue on its face looked like a map of violence, white lines crisscrossing the modeling skin like ancient runes. Its green eyes reflected the deck lights, burning with a cold, alien intelligence that froze Silas in his tracks. If eyes are the windows to the soul, this creature's soul was a cold, dark room. It didn't look like an animal looking at food. It looked like a general inspecting a defeated enemy. It looked at the robot swinging in the air. Then, slowly, deliberately, it turned its head and looked at the crew lining the rail. It looked at Silas. It opened its mouth, revealing those translucent, jagged teeth, and let out a sound that wasn't underwater. It was in the air. A wet, raspy exhalation that sounded like a hiss. It was sniffing the air, smelling the diesel, smelling the fear, analyzing the chemistry of the invaders. Then it sank, slipping beneath the black water without a splash, dissolving into the deep like smoke in a wind tunnel. "Secure the ROV," the chief yelled, snapping the paralysis that had gripped the crew. The robot slammed onto the steel deck with a deafening clang, sliding slightly on the wet metal before the straps were engaged and cinched tight. Silas ran to the machine, slipping on the slick deck but catching himself on the frame. He ignored the catastrophic damage to the expensive electronics. He was looking for evidence. He ran his bare hand over the gashes in the syntactic foam. They were deep, serrated cuts, deeper than any shark bite he had ever seen, carved with a precision that spoke of immense jaw strength. "Look at this," he said, waving Maya over, his voice barely audible over the wind. Embedded in the dense foam, snapped off by the sheer force of the impact, was a tooth. It was 4 inches long, translucent, and jagged like a piece of broken volcanic glass. "That's not ivory," Maya said, touching the sharp edge and pulling her finger back as a bead of bright red blood appeared. "It's too sharp. It feels like silica or chitin. It's harder than bone." They're adapting, Silas said, prying the tooth loose and holding it up to the blinding floodlight. They hunt colossal squid. They hunt deep-sea sharks. They evolved teeth to shear through cartilage and rock-hard beaks. And apparently, they work just fine on high-density industrial foam. This is not a hunting tool, Maya. This is a weapon. Silas, Maya said, crouching by the ruined camera housing, shielding it from the rain with her body. The SD card. The internal recorder on the main camera acts as a backup, even if the fiber link is cut. If the housing isn't breached, she grabbed a wrench from a nearby toolbox and frantically unscrewed the faceplate. Salt water poured out, but the inner ring seal held. She pulled out the small black memory card. It was dry. "We have the footage," she breathed, clutching the plastic square like a diamond. "We saw what happened after the feed cut. We saw the attack." They retreated to the dry lab, huddled around a Toughbook laptop, water dripping from their coats onto the table, creating puddles on the linoleum. Outside, the crew was securing the ship for a run. Captain Holloway had seen the whales. He had seen the size of them. He was done with science. He was pointing the bow north, toward the Falklands, and he was giving the order for full steam. He wanted distance between his ship and those eyes. Maya inserted the card. The video file loaded, the progress bar crawling across the screen. The footage was shaky, lit only by the strobes flashing in the darkness, like a disco in hell. It showed the moment the fiber optic cable was severed. The camera spun wildly, capturing streaks of bubbles and darkness. Then, it stabilized as the ROV's autogyro kicked in, fighting to keep the horizon level. The pod was there. 10 of them. They weren't just attacking the robot in a frenzy. They were dismantling it. One whale grabbed the manipulator arm in its jaws and twisted its body rolls until the hydraulic lines burst, venting hydraulic fluid into the water like green blood. Another bit through the thruster housing, shearing the propeller blades off, disabling the propulsion. They were systematic. They were disabling the movement first. But then, the camera caught something else. Something that made Silas feel sick to his stomach. In the background, hovering just beyond the frenzied attack on the robot, a smaller shape was drifting. It was a calf. A baby. It was pale white, almost albino, glowing like a ghost in the strobe light. It was watching the adults destroy the machine. It looked curious, tilting its head. And then, a large female swam up to the calf. She nudged it forward with her snout. She nudged it toward the crippled robot. She bit a piece of foam off the Argus and spat it out in front of the calf. Then she backed away, waiting. The calf surged forward and bit the robot, tearing a chunk loose, shaking its head to rip the material, mimicking the mother. "She's teaching it," Silas said, his voice horrified. "This isn't defense. This is a training exercise." They used the robot as a practice dummy. Practice for what? Maya asked, her face pale in the monitor's glow. "For anything that comes into their territory," Silas said. "Subs. Drones, US. They are inoculating the next generation against technology. They are teaching them how to kill machines." Suddenly, the ship shuddered violently. A metallic clang rang through the hull, louder than the waves, louder than the wind. It sounded like the ship had hit a rock, a reverberating bell tone that traveled up through the deck. But the depth sounder read 3,000 meters. There were no rocks here. The lights in the lab flickered. What was that? Maya stood up, grabbing the table for balance as the ship listed. The intercom screamed. "Engine room to bridge. We lost the port screw. Something hit the propeller." "Hit it?" Holloway's voice yelled back, panic edging into his command tone. "We hit debris? Shipping container?" "No, sir." "The shaft is bent. The vibration is tearing the main bearing apart. We have to shut down the port engine immediately, or we'll lose the shaft entirely. We're losing propulsion." Silas looked at Maya. "They didn't leave." He ran to the bridge, Maya close behind him, their boots pounding on the metal stairs. Holloway was wrestling with the wheel, his face pale and beaded with sweat, the red glow of alarm lights reflecting in his eyes. "We're limping on one engine," Holloway shouted at Silas as he entered. "We can't outrun the storm like this." "And we certainly can't outrun them. They attacked the prop?" Silas asked, looking at the engine readouts, seeing the RPMs on the port engine dropping to 0. Something did. The vibration sensors went off the charts. It felt like a sledgehammer hit the blades. It stopped a 5-ton bronze propeller dead in the water. "That takes physics I don't understand." Silas looked out the rear window. The wake was churning, illuminated by the stern lights. And there, surfing the wake, were the fins. They were keeping pace with the ship, effortlessly matching the 12 knots the vessel was struggling to maintain. They were surfing the pressure wave created by the ship's displacement, saving energy while the humans burned theirs. "They know," Silas said, staring at the fins. "They know the sound of the engine. They know it's the source of the movement. They targeted the propulsion. Just like they did with the robot. They're whales, damn it." Holloway yelled, slamming his hand on the console. "They don't understand mechanics. They don't understand torque and drive shafts. They understand cause and effect, Captain. They understand that if you break the noisy spinning thing, the big metal whale stops moving. They just dissected my robot. Now they are dissecting your ship. So what do they want?" "They want us to stop," Silas said. "They are territorial. We invaded their home. We dropped a noisy, bright intruder into their living room. And now they are escorting us out. Or what? Or they are hunting us. And like any pack of wolves, they are hamstring the prey before they go for the throat." The ship groaned as another massive wave hit the port quarter. With only one engine, the Polaris was sluggish. It couldn't cut through the swells. It wallowed. The bow dipped dangerously low, taking green water over the rail, the scuppers struggling to drain the deluge. "We need to go faster," Silas said. "If we slow down, they'll attack the rudder. If we lose steering in this storm, we capsize." "I'm giving her everything she's got," Holloway said. "But the starboard engine is overheating. We're pushing too hard." Then the sonar pinged again. A new contact. Massive. Coming from the deep, dead ahead. Directly below us, the sonar tech shouted from the corner, his voice rising in terror. "Rising fast! Race for impact!" The ship was lifted. Physically lifted. The stern rose 3 feet out of the water as something massive impacted the keel from below. The sound was deafening screeching metal, popping rivets, the structural beams crying out in protest as the whole geometry was violated. Everything on the bridge was thrown to the floor. Silas slammed into the chart table, tasting the metallic tang of blood in his mouth. Charts, pencils, and coffee mugs flew across the room. Hull breach. The damage control alarm blared, a piercing electronic shriek that cut through the confusion. Water in the steering gear room. Pumps are failing. "They rammed us," Holloway whispered, staring at the tilt indicator as the ship listed 5 degrees to starboard. "They actually rammed us. They used themselves as a torpedo." Silas scrambled to his feet. He looked at the sonar screen. The massive contact was retreating deep. It was the gray giant. He had used his own body, his own skull armored with millennia of evolution, as a battering ram. "He's testing the hull integrity," Silas said, wiping blood from his lip. "He found the weak spot. The stern is lower in the water due to the squatted profile. He aimed for the breach. We're taking on water," Holloway said into the high-frequency radio, his voice surprisingly calm. "Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is research vessel Polaris. We are disabled and taking on water. Hull breach in the steering compartment. Position 60 degrees south, 45 west. Request immediate assistance." There was only static on the radio. No answer. No crackle of the Coast Guard. No reassuring voice from the Falklands. The antenna, Holloway realized, tapping the mic. "The storm interference." "No," Silas said, looking at the main mast through the rain-streaked window. "Look at the mast." The radio mast, usually towering 30 feet above the bridge, was bent double. A massive, tangled mass of heavy kelp, and something else was wrapped around it. "Did a wave do that?" Holloway asked. "No," Silas said. "They threw something. Or they jumped." "Jumped?" "That mast is 30 feet off the water. Transients can jump 20 feet to hit a dolphin," Silas said. "These things are bigger, stronger. They took out our voice, Captain. We are isolated. The Polaris was dead in the water." The single remaining engine whined and died as the computer shut it down to prevent a catastrophic explosion from the overheating cooling system. The lights flickered and went out, plunging the bridge into absolute darkness, replaced seconds later by the eerie, blood-red glow of the emergency battens. Silence fell over the ship, save for the howling wind outside and the rhythmic slap, slap, slap of water hitting the dead hull. But then, another sound joined the chorus. Thump. Something hit the side of the hull, softly. Probing. Thump. Another hit. Further forward, near the bow. They were circling. They were touching the ship, feeling for vibrations, feeling for signs of life inside the shell. Silas grabbed a heavy-duty flashlight. "Maya," he said, "get the portable acoustic gear. We need to record this. If we sink, the black box will survive. Someone has to know what happened here. Someone has to know that we aren't alone down here. We're going to sink?" Maya asked, her eyes wide with terror, but her hands already moving to grab the recorder. "Not if I can help it," Holloway said, pulling a flare gun from the emergency kit under the console. "I'm not letting a bunch of fish take my ship. Chief, get the damage control team to the stern. Shore up that breach. And bring the rifles from the lockup. We're going to repel boarders." "Don't shoot them," Silas warned, stepping in front of the captain. "If you kill one, they will frenzy. Right now, they are methodical. They are surgical. If you make them angry, they will tear this ship apart plate by plate. Then what do you suggest, Doctor? Ask them nicely to leave? Read them a treaty?" "We have to make ourselves undesirable," Silas said. "We have to stop being a threat. Kill the generators. Kill the sonar. Kill everything that makes noise. We play dead. In a storm?" "The storm is dying down," Silas lied, looking at the barometer, which was still dangerously low. "The swell is long. We can float. But if we make noise, we die." Holloway looked at Silas, then at the red emergency lights, then at the dark water outside where the monsters waited. "Kill it," Holloway ordered. "Black out the ship. Go to full silent running." The Polaris went dark. The hum of the ventilation died. The thrum of the pumps stopped. The ship became a cold steel tomb, bobbing helplessly in the vastness of the Southern Ocean. Silas, Maya, and Holloway stood on the bridge, listening. For 10 minutes, there was nothing but the wind and the creak of the hull. Then, a blow, loud, explosive, right next to the hull. Then another. The whales were surfacing. They were surrounding the ship. And then, a sound began. It vibrated through the steel deck plates, buzzing in the soles of their boots. It wasn't a scream. It was a low, resonant hum. A song. It started with one whale, then two. Then the whole pod joined in. It was a mournful, heavy sound, deeper than a cello, vibrating at a frequency that made Silas's teeth ache. "What are they doing?" Maya whispered. "They're celebrating," Silas said, looking out into the dark where the white blows of the whales appeared like ghosts. They killed the machine. Now they're singing over the carcass. But the song wasn't just a victory lap. As the frequency rose, the hull began to vibrate in sympathy. The loose bolts on the console rattled. The glass in the windows buzzed like a trapped fly. Resonance, Silas realized, terror gripping him. They found the resonant frequency of the hull. They aren't singing. They're shaking us apart. The physics of resonance is a destructive force, usually reserved for earthquakes or opera singers shattering glass. But here, in the middle of the Southern Ocean, it was being weaponized by biology. A singer can shatter a wine glass by holding the right note, matching the natural frequency of the crystal until it vibrates itself to death. An army marching in step across a bridge can cause the structure to sway until it collapses under its own weight. The ghost pod had discovered the note that shattered steel. The Polaris vibrated with a terrifying intensity. It wasn't a violent shaking like an impact, but a deep, harmonic buzzing that seemed to emanate from the molecular structure of the metal itself. Screws loosened and fell from the ceiling panels. Seals cracked on the watertight doors. Fillings in the crew's teeth rattled painfully. The song grew louder, a cacophony of overlapping frequencies that seemed to bypass the ears and resonate directly in the chest cavity, creating a sensation of intense nausea and panic. It was acoustic warfare, designed to drive the occupants out. Stop them. Captain Holloway yelled, clapping his hands over his ears as the bridge windows began to sing, spiderweb cracks appearing in the corners. Make it stop. We can't, Silas shouted over the din, holding onto the chart table as it jittered across the floor like a living thing. They're using the hull as a tuning fork. They're amplifying the sound. If this continues, the welds will fail and the ship will unzip. In the engine room, the damage was catastrophic. The vibration was loosening the patch on the hull breech. The bolts holding the steel plate over the hole were unscrewing themselves, spinning out as if turned by invisible hands. Water began to spray in, not as a trickle, but as a high-pressure jet that cut through the air. The bilge pumps were offline. The water level rose, dark and freezing, quickly swallowing the catwalks and shorting out the emergency batteries. Abandon ship, Holloway ordered, grabbing the radio handset, though it was dead, acting out the rituals of command in the face of chaos. Get to the lifeboats. Now, everyone off. Muster at stations. The crew scrambled onto the wet, pitching deck. The storm had abated slightly, leaving behind a rolling, oily swell that heaved the ship up and down in a sickening rhythm. The lifeboats were David launched, fully enclosed orange capsules designed for the worst weather on Earth. They were unsinkable sanctuaries. But launching them meant dropping them directly into the water, directly into the pod. Wait! Silas blocked the way to the port lifeboat, grabbing the bosun by the jacket and shoving him back. Don't launch yet. Look. He pointed over the rail. The water was glowing. It wasn't bioluminescence. It was the whales. As they sang, they were agitating the water so violently that the cavitation bubbles created by their sound waves were collapsing and emitting light sonoluminescence. The sea around the ship was a halo of eerie, flashing blue light, like a submerged welding torch. And in that light, Silas saw them clearly for the first time. There were 20 of them. The gray giant was the conductor, holding station off the beam, his massive head raised out of the water, eyes glowing green in the reflected light. The others circled. They weren't just swimming. They were executing a ritual. They were swimming in a counterclockwise vortex, creating a localized whirlpool that sucked debris toward the ship. They were creating a kill zone. They're waiting for us to leave the shell, Maya said, her voice trembling as she looked at the circling monsters. They know the ship is dying. They want the soft meat inside. They are peeling the can. We can't stay here, Holloway said, panic edging into his voice as the deck slanted further. The ship is listing 15 degrees. She's going down. The bulkheads are groaning. We have maybe 10 minutes before she capsizes. If we drop those boats, Silas said, they will smash them like eggs. We need a distraction. We need to clear the water. What kind of distraction? Noise, Silas said. We need something louder than them. Something that hurts. Something that breaks their concentration. The seismic air guns, Maya realized, her eyes widening. We have the survey array on the back deck. It's designed to punch sound through 5 miles of rock to find oil deposits. The compressor is offline, Holloway argued. We have no power. We can't charge the guns. The emergency air tanks for the dive locker, Silas said, already running toward the stern, slipping on the wet deck. We can bypass the compressor. We can fire one shot. Just one. But it will be like a grenade going off underwater. It will be 250 decibels at the source. Do it, Holloway said. Chief, rig it up. Silas and the deck chief, a burly man named Peterson, who looked ready to fight God himself, raced to the stern. The air guns hung in their racks, massive steel cylinders that looked like cannons. They dragged the high-pressure scuba tanks over, jury-rigging a connection with hoses and duct tape, their fingers numb from the cold. The vibration of the ship was making it hard to work. Nuts were spinning off bolts spontaneously, pinging against the bulkheads. Hurry, Silas yelled, fumbling with the valve. The water is at the gunwale. She's settling by the stern. The whales sensed the activity. The song changed pitch. It became sharper, more urgent. The gray giant slapped his tail against the water, a crack that sounded like a gunshot. The circle tightened. They were coming in. Ready, the chief screamed. Firing in 3, 2, 1. He threw the valve. The airgun fired. Boom. The sound was not heard. It was felt. A shockwave of compressed air hit the water with the force of a depth charge. A massive bubble erupted from the stern, throwing a geyser of water 50 feet into the air. The sound pulse traveled outward at 1,500 meters per second, a wall of acoustic violence that turned the water white. The singing stopped instantly. The whales scattered. The shockwave would have been agonizing to their sensitive ears, like a flashbang going off in a dark room. It would have stunned them, disoriented them, deafened them temporarily. They dove, fleeing the source of the pain, their formation broken. Go! Silas screamed, his ears ringing. Launch the boats! Go, go, go! The crew piled into the orange capsules, dragging survival kits and flares. Holloway, the last one on deck, looked at his sinking ship. She was a good girl, he whispered, patting the cold railing one last time. Then he jumped into the boat and sealed the hatch. The davits released. The boats hit the water with a splash. The motors fired, coughing blue smoke into the cold air. Head north, Holloway commanded over the handheld radio. Full throttle. Get away from the ship. Get out of the blast radius. The 2 lifeboats sped away from the dying Polaris, bucking over the swells, their small engines screaming. Behind them, the research vessel groaned one last time. The bow rose into the air, majestic and tragic, the lights flickering once before dying forever. Then, with a sigh of escaping air that sounded like a final breath, she slipped beneath the surface, heading down to the dark where the whales lived. Silas sat in the stern of the lifeboat, looking back through the plexiglass port. The sonar screen on the boat's console was clear. No contacts. Just the empty, rolling ocean. We did it, Maya said, shivering in her survival suit, her face pale. We scared them off. For now, Silas said, wiping water from his face. But airguns don't kill them. It just hurts them. They'll be angry. And they'll be back. They motored for an hour. The storm broke, and the moon came out, painting the ocean in silver light. It was beautiful and desolate. They were 300 miles from land, floating in plastic eggs in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by the coldest water on the planet. We have a distress beacon, Holloway said, checking the panel. A satellite signal went out when the ship went down. Rescue is probably 12 hours away. We just have to drift and wait. 12 hours. In the Southern Ocean, that is a lifetime. Silas watched the depth sounder. 2,000 meters. 3,000 meters. The bottom was falling away. They were over the trench. The water beneath them was deeper than the height of the Rockies. Turn off the motor, Silas said suddenly. What? No, Holloway said. We need to make distance. We need to get away from the sinking site. Turn it off. We're making noise. We're a beacon. They track sound. If we keep running, we're just ringing the dinner bell. We need to be silent. Holloway hesitated, looking at the dark water, then cut the engine. The silence returned. The boat bobbed in the swell, drifting with the current. Listen, Silas whispered. They listened, the slap of water against fiberglass, the breathing of 20 terrified people, the creak of the plastic hull, and then a click. It came through the hull. Click, click, click. They found us, Silas said, defeated. He slumped against the bulkhead. How? Maya asked. We're miles away. They tracked the wake, Silas said. Or they just knew where we would go, north, toward safety. They predicted us. The water around the lifeboat began to boil. Start the engine, Holloway screamed, fumbling for the key. No, Silas grabbed his hand. Don't. If you run, you trigger the chase instinct. Sit still. Be a log. Be debris. If we look like trash, maybe they'll ignore us. The water erupted. A whale breached right next to the boat. It wasn't the gray giant. It was the calf. The white one. It rose vertically, spy-hopping, its eye level with the window of the lifeboat. It looked inside. It saw the people huddled in the orange light. It saw the fear. It opened its mouth and squealed. A high, playful sound. A child calling for its parents. It's calling them, Maya said. It's the scout. Then the adults arrived. They didn't ram the boat. They didn't capsize it. They did something worse. They began to push it. They lined up on either side of the lifeboat, their bodies acting as fenders. They nudged the boat, turning it. They're turning us around, Holloway said, watching the compass spin wildly. They're pushing us south. South? Silas looked at the compass. South is Antarctica. South is the ice pack. Why? Because that's where they live, Silas said. They're taking us home. The realization hit the crew with the force of a physical blow. They weren't being killed. They were being abducted. The whales were taking the survivors back to their territory, away from the rescue corridors, away from the shipping lanes. They were taking them into the frozen wilderness. They want to keep us, Silas whispered. Like pets. Or like trophies. Or maybe just to see how long we last in the cold. We are playthings now. We can't let them take us to the ice, Holloway said. We'll freeze. We'll starve. We have to fight. We have to fight back, the deck chief said, grabbing a flare gun. I'll shoot the first one that surfaces. No flares, Silas said. Fire. They're afraid of fire. But if we shoot it at them, they might dive and capsize us in the wake. We need to create a barrier. We have diesel, Holloway said, in the emergency jerry cans. 5 gallons. Pour it, Silas commanded. Pour it on the water behind us. And light it. That's crazy. We'll burn the boat. Better to burn than to be dragged to the bottom of the world, Silas said. Do it. We create a wall of fire. They opened the rear hatch. The cold air rushed in. The whales were right there, their blowholes misting the windows. They were pushing the boat at a steady 5 knots. The chief poured the diesel. The slick spread out on the water, oily and iridescent in the moonlight. Fire, Silas yelled. Holloway fired the flare into the slick. Whoosh, the ocean caught fire. A wall of orange flame erupted behind the boat. The heat was intense, searing the paint on the stern. The light was blinding. The whales screamed. It was a sound of pure panic. Fire is the one thing that does not exist in the ocean. It is an alien terror. It represents the unchecked power of the surface world. They dove. They scattered instantly, diving deep to escape the heat and the light. The lifeboat was free. Start the engine, Silas yelled. Go north, go. Holloway gunned the motor. The lifeboat surged forward, leaping away from the burning slick. They ran, They ran until the fuel gauge was on empty. They ran until the sun came up over the endless horizon. At dawn, a shadow passed over them. A C-130 Hercules aircraft, painted in Coast Guard colors. "Rescue!" Maya wept, collapsing onto the floor. "They found us." The plane dipped its wings, circling low. A radio dropped on a parachute, splashing nearby. "Research vessel Polaris survivors," the pilot's voice crackled. "We have you visual. A cutter is 2 hours out. Hang tight, you're going home." They were saved. But Silas wasn't looking at the plane. He was looking at the water. The ocean was calm. But deep down, he knew they were still there. Watching, remembering. They had encountered a new species of intelligence. One that held grudges. One that learned. One that took hostages. As the Coast Guard cutter pulled alongside hours later, lifting the exhausted survivors onto the deck, Silas looked back one last time. Far in the distance, a single spout of mist rose. Then a tail fluke. It slapped the water once. A goodbye or a promise? Silas knew the answer. The ocean wasn't theirs anymore. It belonged to the ghost pod, and humanity had just declared war on the dark. The world is exceptionally good at forgetting the things it cannot explain. When the survivors of the Polaris returned to shore, huddled on the deck of the Coast Guard cutter, the media frenzy lasted exactly a week. The headlines called it a rogue wave incident, a tragedy of weather and circumstance. They called the subsequent whale attacks anomalous, behavior triggered by distress signals, dismissing the coordinated assault as the panicked thrashing of confused animals disoriented by the storm. The official report from the National Transportation Safety Board, released 6 months later, was a masterpiece of bureaucratic fiction. It cited catastrophic structural failure due to extreme weather conditions and buried the eyewitness accounts of the crew in the appendix, labeling them as hallucinations induced by hypothermia, trauma, and nitrogen narcosis. The footage from the ROV, the dismantled robot, the pale calf learning to destroy, the gray giant with the glowing eyes, was classified by the Navy before it ever saw the light of day. It vanished into a vault in Virginia, tagged as top secret. Dr. Silas Vance tried to publish his findings. He wrote papers. He gave lectures. He screamed into the void of academia. He was blocked at every turn by peer review boards who called his data inconclusive and his theories cryptozoological fantasy. His grant money evaporated. His reputation was quietly smothered by lack of funding and a surplus of ridicule. He was labeled as the crazy whale guy, a cautionary tale for young scientists. Maya Karas went back to teaching high school biology in landlocked Kansas, as far from the ocean as she could get, refusing to ever step foot on a boat again. She lived in a house with no windows facing east. Captain Holloway drank himself to death in a bar in Cape Town 6 months later, muttering about eyes in the dark to anyone who would buy him a gin. But the ocean remembers. It holds grudges longer than men holding breath. 5 years after the sinking of the Polaris, strange reports began to trickle in from the southern hemisphere. A Japanese whaling fleet went silent off the coast of Antarctica. When the search planes found them, the ships were drifting, their propellers sheared off at the shaft, their hulls battered by what the salvage crews called blunt force trauma. The factory ship looked like it had been hit by a wrecking ball. No crew were found, no bodies, just empty ships ghosting through the ice, their decks scrubbed clean by waves, or something else. A nuclear submarine, the USS Connecticut, collided with an uncharted seamount in the South Atlantic, a seamount that moved and left teeth embedded in the titanium hull. The impact was so severe it cracked the outer casing. Deep-sea fiber optic cables, the arteries of the global internet, began to fail with alarming frequency in the southern latitudes, cut by jaws that could shear steel armor. Communication with research stations went dark for days at a time. Silas Vance sat in his small, cluttered apartment in Seattle, staring at a map of the world pinned to his wall. He was connecting the dots with red string. The incidents formed a ring around Antarctica. A perimeter, a fence. "They're expanding," he whispered to the empty room, tracing the line. "They're enforcing a no-go zone." He wasn't crazy. He wasn't wrong. The ghost pod hadn't just survived the encounter. They had learned from it. They had learned that surface ships were fragile shells filled with soft meat. They had learned that propellers were the Achilles heel of human technology. And most terrifyingly, they had taught this knowledge to others. The behaviors Silas had witnessed, the coordinated sabotage, the targeting of propulsion, the use of hostages, were spreading like a virus. The culture of the deep was infecting the surface pods. The knowledge was moving north. One rainy Tuesday, a package arrived at Silas's door. It had no return address, just a postmark from Topeka, Kansas. Inside was a hard drive and a note scrawled on a napkin. "You were right. Maya." Silas plugged in the drive. It contained unauthorized copies of hydrophone recordings from a dozen oceanographic institutes around the world. He put on his headphones, his hands trembling. The sound was unmistakable. The high-pitched scream, the click trains. But there was something new, a low rhythmic pulsing that underpinned the calls. It sounded like chanting. It sounded like a war drum. Silas ran the audio through his analysis software. The pattern was consistent across thousands of miles of ocean. It was a language, a complex, evolving syntax. And it was getting louder. The final file on the drive was a video. It was taken from a security camera on an oil rig in the South Atlantic, just before it collapsed into the sea 2 weeks ago. The camera looked down at the platform's legs. The water was boiling with whales, hundreds of them, gray giants, pale calves, surface orcas. They were working together. The surface orcas were creating waves to wash the workers off the lower decks. The deep-sea giants were down below, ramming the support struts in shifts, battering the steel until it buckled. It was a siege. It was an active war against the industrialization of the ocean. Silas sat back, the horror washing over him. We had spent decades wondering if we were alone in the universe, looking up at the stars for intelligent life. We never thought to look down. And now that we had found it, or rather, now that it had found us, it didn't want to communicate. It didn't want peace. It wanted us gone. The ghost pod wasn't just a biological anomaly. It was an immune response. The ocean was sick of us, sick of our plastic, our noise, our drilling, our killing. And it had dispatched white blood cells the size of buses to purge the infection. The video ended with the rig groaning and tipping into the sea. The camera went underwater, the lens capturing the chaotic descent. For a split second before the feed cut, a face filled the frame. A gray, scarred face with green, glowing eyes. It didn't look angry. It didn't look like a mindless beast. It looked patient. It looked inevitable. Silas turned off the computer. He walked to the window and looked out at the Puget Sound. The water was gray and calm. A ferry was crossing to Bainbridge Island, full of commuters staring at their phones, drinking coffee, oblivious to the water beneath them. For now, the war was in the south, but currents move, ideas spread, and the ocean is one single connected body. It is only a matter of time before they come north, before the silence falls over the Atlantic, before the lights go out in the coastal cities, before the ferries stop running. We poked the dragon in the dark, and now the dragon is awake. So the next time you stand on the beach and look out at the beautiful, endless blue horizon, remember this story. Remember that the surface is just a thin skin over a deep, dark world that we do not own. Remember that there are things down there that are older than us, smarter than us, and they are done hiding. We are not the masters of this planet. We are just tourists, and the locals are getting restless. If this story chilled you to the bone, if it made you rethink what lies beneath the waves, hit that like button and subscribe. We have more stories from the edge of the unknown coming soon. Until then, stay safe, stay dry, and whatever you do, don't look down.